Hey everybody, Chaz Molder, Mayor of the City of Columbia, coming to you for our next installment of the virtual town hall. We've really enjoyed these virtual town halls over the last several weeks as we were at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which allowed us an opportunity to continue to flow information to you. And even as we see the opening up here locally and across the state of Tennessee, we find that these virtual town halls are important because it's still important that you know what's happening and that you receive information and you have an opportunity to do your part. And that today is going to be our focus. What can you do to do your part in terms of giving back to your community? That's why I'm very excited today that we have the Tennessee Media Specialist for the United States Census, June Iljana, joining us from West Tennessee today. June, I was pausing on your last name because I wanted to make sure I got it right. I hope I did. I'll call you June if that's okay going forward. But June, we appreciate you for being here today. We know that the census is an important 10-year event for the entire country, frankly. It's required in our Constitution. That's how important that it is. And we're excited to have you and learn a little bit more. So first things first, just in your own words, as someone who has been living this and breathing this for the last several months as an employee of the Census Bureau, tell the viewers the importance and why should someone participate in the Census 2020?
I'm really glad you asked that question because a lot of people are aware of the census, but they don't know how it affects them individually. And it wasn't until I came to work for the Census Bureau that I learned that myself. The census is, as he mentioned, required in the Constitution, and it has actually two functions in law. One is that it helps to establish our political representation at the federal level and in drawing a voting district boundaries. So that's very important to us as we plan for the future of our communities and as we make sure that our voice is heard in decisions. But the second part that's required in the Constitution, most people are not aware of, and that is that the census data is used to reapportion or give back our federal tax money to our states and local communities. So being counted in the census is incredibly important to each one of us.
Well, it's two very important points, and frankly, one that I had not really even thought of, but you're exactly right with regard to the redistricting and setting boundaries for not just congressional districts and not just state legislative districts, but also local county commission districts and city council districts will all be impacted by the census because all of those districts are dictated or formed based upon population numbers for that particular district. And so for someone sitting at home who may be wondering, what congressional district we're in and why, the census is another important piece of that puzzle. So I appreciate you pointing that out. And then the second point is with regard to funding. We know that a lot of our federal and state funding is dictated based upon population, and there's really only one true barometer for that population number and the funding that we get, and that is, in fact, the census number, correct?
You're absolutely right. And even beyond the money that automatically flows to the states and counties, we have access to more federal funds via grant opportunities. I'm sure that your city, you do a lot for your community, and I'm sure some of that is funded through grants. When you do a grant application, it's required that you include census data, depending on it. If you're putting together a program for your senior community, then you have to be able to show through official census data how many seniors will be affected by that program.
Another very important, compelling reason why folks should participate. I know that across the country, on a daily basis, basically the census count is put out there publicly. We're all sort of in a little bit of an internal competition with our peer cities and peer counties and states. To the extent you have any of the information available, give us a little bit of a gauge on how Columbia and Maury County is performing with regard to the current census operation.
I'm really happy to give you those numbers because they're good. The work you are doing there in your community is paying off. Nationwide and the state of Tennessee, the response rate currently is about 60.6%, which is good. It's what we were expecting to see. But in Maury County, you guys are at, let me double check, 64.5%. So that's higher than the general average. And then in the northeast part of your county, it's up into the 73% range. Still more work to be done in the west and south parts of the county.
Well, that is good information. Glad to hear that we're outperforming the national average. You may know in the city of Columbia, we actually created a task force early on in this process, led by our Vice Mayor, Dr. Krista Martin, who has been meeting regularly with census officials, but also with local officials here on the ground. And we've been really working to be creative, whether it be doing some traditional media, social media, but also just talking in the community about the importance. And I know for me, everywhere I go, and I know the same is true with our vice mayor and other council members, to just sort of let this be a part of our conversation because it is so important. And speaking of sort of the timeline of this, I mean, I know we're sort of in the thick of the census 2020, so to speak, as we've now hit the month of June for 2020. Where are we, and at what point does the official counting stop, and where are we on that clock process?
Well, the census was affected like so many other organizations or any activities in our world have been affected by COVID-19. So we've made some operational adjustments, meaning that the census was going to end in July. We've extended it out through the end of October to give people an opportunity to respond to the census on their own via email, via the internet, or a telephone call, or sending in their census form through the mail. And then we're going to have them doing that through the end of October. That will give us more time also to bring people on board to go and follow up with those households that don't respond on their own.
Well, that is a great information to know that it has been extended, because obviously there was a lot of things that were on a shutdown for a period of time. And so to know that the census saw that that was a need to continue on for a period longer is certainly a good thing. What do you say to the person, June, who is sitting at home watching this, has not responded to the census, and might not feel comfortable divulging information, or being worried about their own personal information? Obviously, we all have our concerns about, what we're divulging. What would your response be to that person who might have some concerns?
Well, I think a lot of people aren't aware of the fact that the census is completely confidential. Whatever information you provide to the Census Bureau is kept within that one agency and isn't shared with any other government agencies anywhere, not law enforcement, not social services. It won't get to your landlord. So your information is completely protected. So that is one thing to think about. But the second thing to think about is the questions are very simple. We're only asking people to tell us who lives in the house. We're asking for their age, we're asking for their race, and we're asking for their relationship to the householder. This information is important for the redistricting data that we give to states and communities. But it's not difficult information to share. So we encourage people to do that. My third point on this would be that there's no risk to you in responding to the census. There's only a benefit to your community and to your family in you responding to the census.
Well, just as soon as you were saying that, really, to me, the only risk in not responding to the census is the detriment that will result to the community if it's not properly accounted for in terms of funding that it would receive. You touched on this briefly, but let me just go back to it because I think it's an important point. There are a multitude of ways for someone to respond. And candidly, I had put my envelope that came from the Census Bureau to the side for a few weeks, sort of peak COVID. And then I decided it was time to do it. And I thought, man, this is going to take a long time. I don't have enough time to do it, but I did it anyway. I got online, and literally within a matter of, I think, less than 10 minutes, I had completed the full count for my family of 5, all of us. So we all know that you can go on the internet, but what are the multitude of ways that someone can participate and respond, assuming that they've lost that envelope that they received in the mail?
Yeah, the internet is the easiest way, and we have received great response through people responding. This is the first year that you can actually respond to this census on the internet, and a lot of people are taking advantage of that. If you'd like to know, you can respond at 2020census.gov. The other ways to respond are that you can just call in and give your information to a live person. The telephone number for that is 844-330-2020. And it's a quick and easy process, just like doing it online. If you're not comfortable with either of those options, or if you'd like to take your time about it, please just fill out the questionnaire that comes to you in the mail and send that in. Any way you're counted works for us.
That's great information. Another question I know I've received from a few people about the census is, what about the fact that I have an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old college student who technically I still help support, but doesn't technically live under my roof anymore. Do they respond on their own and count for themselves? The last thing they want to do is double tap on anything. But what's the response to that predicament if you have a college student or someone over 18 that you might still be providing support for?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because college students are of particular interest to us in this census because of the COVID-19 situation. Now, if someone is not living most of the time in your home, you should not count them on your census form. They should be counted where they live most of the time. If you're away at school, you'll be counted in your dorm if you live in a dorm. If you live off campus and you're not being counted by your school, then you need to respond to the census as a household. So if you have roommates, for instance, one person needs to respond to the census and count everyone living in that household. We had a problem because most students went home. Students who were living near their college went home during COVID-19. And so they're technically at home during this time, but we want people to count students where they live most of the time, where they would be living if they didn't have to leave for COVID-19.
Very good information for sure, because we know we have a large college population here in Columbia that come home for holidays, but otherwise might not be here in the regular course of events. Let me ask you another question. There's also other vulnerable members of the community, of the population, that are oftentimes harder to reach. What are some of those demographics, and what, in your experience, would you believe to be ways that you can reach those populations to make sure that they're also counted?
Anyone who's living in a complex living situation, multi-generational households, or people who are, moving from place to place frequently, renters are also more difficult for us to count. Anyone living at a lower socioeconomic level tends to be harder to count. Very young children are incredibly important for us to count, because the census data will be used to plan things for them that they'll grow up with over the next 10 years. So how we reach out to those groups is by building relationships within the community with organizations and government services that provide services for those individuals.
Very good. I know that here in the city of Columbia, again, through Dr. Martin's leadership as the chair of our local task force, we have some events planned and some ideas sort of outside the box, because again, there are some people, and they may be in a demographic you mentioned or not, that just, have some reservations about responding. And so what we're trying to promote is the positive of responding and participating. And as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, people often ask me, how can I give back to our community? Or what can I do to help others? And it's not cliche to say that participating in and making sure you're counted in the census is a way to give back to your community, because again, there will be federal and state benefits, notably being dollars, that will flow down, that'll in large part be dictated by the population count. So that, again, is the message that you're sending, and the one that I want to send here locally, is that it's just so important, and it's a good opportunity, a very easy and cheap opportunity to do something good for your community. As we sort of round third and head home, June, one thing also that's important to point out to those listening, that of course, as we are in a period of economic distress, particularly with our unemployment rate being very high right now as a result of COVID-19, we know that the census often hires thousands of people across the United States, and that's true here locally as well. Is the census still hiring even at this stage? And if it is, if someone's watching at home, how could they go about submitting an application and becoming part of your team?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because we are definitely looking for people to help us follow up with those households that don't respond on their own. The census pays really well. It is in the range of $18 to $22 an hour in Murray County. It really changes based on the county, and it's set by the Bureau of Labor Statistics data. But we are looking for people. It is flexible. You can fit it around your other commitments. And we pay 58 cents a mile in travel as you go to different residences. So with our low gas prices, that you can't beat that. You can apply easily within 20 to 30 minutes online at 2020census.gov/jobs. It's a simple process. You need to be a U.S. citizen. You need to have a social security number and a few other requirements. So I invite everyone to apply.
Very good information. So 2020census.gov is where you want to go if you want to participate in the census. 2020census.gov/jobs is where you want to go if you want to submit an application for employment for the census. June, thanks so much for that good information. I'm going to close now with 2 true or false questions for you. We'll see how we can come up with this here. So first of all information provided to the census is entirely confidential and cannot be used against you by government or in court. True or false?
True.
All right. And that's one you touched on earlier, that, at the end of the day, this census is not for any purpose other than getting an accurate population count. It seeks very limited information, and it is for that singular purpose alone. Second true or false question: people who do not get a census invitation in the mail do not need to worry about responding.
That is not true. People who do not receive an invitation in the mail from the Census Bureau yet will receive one that will be delivered to them soon. We have a number of households that have non-traditional mailing addresses, so we weren't able to send that to them through the mail. But as soon as it's safe to do so, census takers will go and deliver a questionnaire to those homes.
And how soon do you anticipate we'll start seeing some of those census takers on the ground here visibly in our communities? Any idea on that?
Just as soon as it's safe. We're actually taking guidance from federal and state and local health authorities on when the best time to begin that process is, but we are hiring right now, training people in safety, use of personal protective equipment, the best safe way to go and interact with the public. And I just want to reassure everyone that we take the COVID-19 threat very seriously, and protecting the safety of our workers as well as the public, that's our highest priority. And that's why we're not out right now.
Well, certainly we appreciate the approach that Census has taken with regard to COVID-19. And, hopefully, if not ironically, it may be that the COVID-19 is forcing some best practices for the census that might end up resulting in an even higher response rate, so we can always look for some silver linings for sure. June, a lot of takeaways today. Really appreciate it. If there's any question regarding the importance, hopefully today will be at Exhibit A as to the importance. You've talked about the importance with regard to representation in government, both federally, state, and locally, very important from a census perspective. You've also talked about the funding piece, another very important piece of the puzzle. 2020census.gov and the phone number 844-330-2020 is the phone number to call to learn more. June, we really appreciate you and all you're doing and your entire team here in the state of Tennessee. We're glad to know that Maury County is tracking higher than the rest of the state and country, and we're going to continue to try to be a leader in that conversation.
Great, thank you. We are so grateful for all the work that you are putting in your community to get a complete count.
Thanks so much. Everybody, make sure you do your part, give back to your community, and participate in the 2020 census. We'll look forward to seeing you next time for our virtual town hall series. Until then, see you later. Bye-bye.